And the next thing I'm going to put in a chat. So chat's available there, guys, for you. If you want to ask a question at any stage, just work away and ask the question. Okay, so welcome to this session. It's part of our legislative guidance series, and again, we do one per month, and we pick a particular topic, and we can do topics on request as well, but we are trying to follow a set format, and any of the existing topics that have been done are available. You can just contact Ashling for this. Again, this has been just recorded for individuals who may not make this session. Right, for those of you who are new to this, my name is Paddy McHugh, and we work with Comply Plus, and we primarily try to support clients with the management of safety. So this is a strange one, really, because induction kind of covers two different remits, really, because there's HR compliance legislation, and there's also health and safety legislation, and then you've got the work issues as well. Now, we are not HR consultants. We're just going to give you an overview of the HR requirement here, but we're not HR consultants, so just be mindful of that. But from a health and safety standpoint, we're going to cover that as well. But it's important that I give you both sides of it, so you don't just go away with the health and safety aspect of it. So this is a webinar, and there's the overview of it. So we're going to look at why is induction so important, the key safety requirements. We're going to look at linking to a training plan and performance management. We're going to look at designing the induction. We're looking at assigning responsibilities for conducting the induction, and then drawing up an induction schedule. And also look at getting sign-off and validation that the induction has been complete. In a lot of cases, and it's not necessarily by design, it's more by default, where a company would take on one or more people, even companies that are used to taking on people, that sometimes inductees fall through the cracks because they get bits of the induction complete and other bits gets missed. Or in some cases, the induction isn't designed that well in terms of, well, they start on a Monday morning and they're told to sit at a desk and they're given a copy of the safety statement, a copy of procedures and policies to read and sign off. And they spend the day basically going through that. And at the end of the day, or during the day, at some stage, they'll be told, well, you know, who is who and where the fire escapes are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and sign here and thank you very much, you're inducted. Now, that's, whilst that might tick a box, shall we say, it actually isn't fair on the organization, it isn't fair on the individual, and it's very far from reaching compliance with what should be in place. So again, we're going to just go through from a compliance standpoint, and then we'll add a couple of little bits there at the end towards what we call improvements that can help from a performance management standpoint. We're also going to look at re-induction as well and why we should do that. So the first question is, why is induction so important? Well, employees training is extremely important for any business, and delivering an effective induction training program should be an integral part of your company strategy. It's actually very, very important. Now, some of you might already know this, that trying to get staff at the moment is quite difficult. And we'll change that to trying to get competent staff, so people that fit into the box that you want them to do. That's even harder again. So you go to all this time trying to find somebody, then it's very important that when you do get that person, that you give them every chance of being successful in your business and being successful for your business. By investing in an effective induction training for your workforce, it shows true value in them. In other words, they feel that they've been respected and you're looking after their interests. It can improve loyalty and staff retention. It's actually proven it can improve loyalty and staff retention because they get a very good grounding initially when coming into a company. It does help attract others. So, of course, if people feel valued, well, they have no problem in telling other people about the company they work for. and some, that may create an opportunity. It helps improve communication. I would rephrase that by saying it clarifies lines of communication, so they're not in doubt as to who to contact for what, or who is responsible for what. And a lot of times, I just started, I don't know. Somebody asks you a question, I just started here, I don't know, I haven't been told. And again, there's things that really aren't very good, because it's important that lines of communication are clearly defined as to who is responsible for what. It aids faster contribution to the business. So it brings them up to speed at a faster pace. Now, there's a bit of a difference between bringing up to speed at a faster pace and working at the pace that's required for the company. Because sometimes an inductee can be taken on board and they're put into the fire line straight away. And yes, they're contributing to the business, but they're also making mistakes that's costing the business. So in actual fact, speed may not necessarily be good for the business in terms of getting them to a level. So doing it the correct way, it helps the business quicker because of less mistakes, less issues, less resources being diverted to address issues or mistakes that have been made. Save time and money. What I just said helps save time and money. It's quite easy to identify that. And from my point, it helps maintain a safe work environment, because safety is part of safe working practices. And the next one is it helps to manage expectations. And it's a big thing we're going to look at in terms of the expectations of the employee. So help manage them, but also help manage the expectation of their supervisor, their manager, and the company. Again, it has to be very, very clear, because you can have individuals who think that, yeah, I'm doing very, very well, brilliant, I'm very happy, yeah, I'm enjoying myself, great company to work for. But the management might think quite the opposite. Well, no, they're not doing what we want them to do, etc. So there's a total miscommunication. And again, I'm going to look at ways to minimize or reduce that. So from a legislative requirement, we're going to look at a HR standpoint first. So terms of employment, that's a contract, a written statement of terms of employment, commencement date and type of contract. So it could be temporary, permanent. We do always advocate a probational contract when somebody is starting. We do suggest that it is a minimum of 6 months, if not a year. And we would advocate, as you're going to see later on, that you review that periodically to manage expectations and set key performance targets as well in place, and lots of other things to help evaluate during that probationary time whether the person has the capabilities and suitability for the work. So is a contract fixed, temporary, probationary? Confirm employee details, job description, working hours, rest periods, pay frequency, entitlements, holidays, sickness benefit, other types of leave, maternity, paternity, pension, all of these things, notice periods, grievance and disciplinary procedures. These are all, they're governed by HR legislative requirements. Performance management and competency requirements, slightly outside of legislative requirements, but very, very important in terms of, what is the expectations in terms of the activities that people are going on. And how is that reviewed? What is the review process? And again, a lot of times companies make mistakes by having great intentions, but not following through on the performance reviews. So it becomes then no review, and no review means room for error and misinterpretation. And then you have poor alignment of expectations, and then you end up in a bit of trouble. So from a health, safety, and well-being standpoint, it's very, very specific. So there's lots of, I've just taken brief extracts out of the legislation for you, just to give you an overview of what the legislation says that should be in place from the employer standpoint, okay? So out of the 2005 Act, ensure that information is in a form, manner, and language that is reasonably likely to be understood by person. So again, anybody engaging individuals whose first language isn't English, you have to ensure that they have appropriate understanding of the language, or they have a process of ensuring that they're made aware of that, which may need some translation, or maybe a supervisor who's proficient in their language, and that can be managed. Again, it has to be done in a very reasonable way. Provide adequate instruction, training and supervision and any necessary information to employees. To induct new employees on the safety controls and risks prior to commencing work activities. This is a very hard one to actually comply with. It's saying that before an employee is exposed to risk, the person must be appropriately trained on the associated control measures for that. It's a very, very difficult one. So let's say someone come in and they need manual handling training, they haven't had it before. We have to, traditionally you have to wait for a course or put them on a course. Could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So does that mean you shouldn't put them lifting, moving, shunting boxes? Well, that's what the law says. Now, online has made it a lot easier, so you can induct them, do the manual handling theory online, and you have a practical on the day they start. So it does help a little bit in addressing that. But again, that's just manual handling. There are other areas of risk in businesses, and again, the law says that you should make them aware of that, the risks, and train them in that before they're exposed to those risks. Provide information on hazards, risks, and measures taken as regard to safety, health, and welfare affecting specific tasks or operations carried out by those persons. So if they're doing specific tasks, using a machine, driving a vehicle, or whatever, then any hazards, risks, and measures taken with regard to safety, they must be informed, and you need to get sign off on that before they do start that. Provide information on emergency arrangements, including the individuals associated with responsibilities for same. So, for example, the fire wardens and first aiders, etc., and what to do in the event of an emergency, fire evacuation, etc. So there's a few different ones there. Provide information on the safety consultation and participation arrangements, including the names of safety representatives. And this is particularly more for the larger companies where they would have safety reps. And again, the employee should be told who the safety reps are, how you can contact them, and information regarding consultation process, etc. Provide training to employees so there's no financial cost to employees. Again, it's another one that employees sometimes can sometimes not understand. Employees should not be out of pay or should not be out of pocket for attending training. So, for example, if your normal days of work are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and someone's got to attend training in an evening or a Saturday, then they have to be duly compensated for that training. It shouldn't be out of pocket for that. Provide training on the job to be carried out and measures to be taken in an emergency. So, if the job, if there's an emergency situation with a machine, for example, an emergency stop, that has to stop the equipment when there's a fault or an issue, the person has to be trained in those emergency arrangements relating to that machinery. Assign tasks based on the capabilities in relation to safety and health and welfare. Employees must not be put at risk by being given work that they do not have the competence to undertake. So employees have to be assessed for competency for the job that they're doing. And employers, by giving them a job, are deeming them competent. So competency is having sufficient training, knowledge, and experience appropriate to the work that they're engaged in. So again, this is one that employees need to do. So how do we assess competency? Well, we're going to have to do an assessment of that competency, and we're going to have to demonstrate that as well. Consider the training needs of all employees, including supervisors and managers. So, and this is sometimes where we get a bit lost, and that's why we're focusing on supervisory requirements next month, is that we tend to forget that the supervisor has to be trained how to supervise. It has to be trained how to supervise effectively in regard to safety, for example. So there are things that need to be considered when we're taking on employees, as who else needs to be trained about or in relation to the work that's being done. Other things, protect against the specific dangers that affect groups of particularly sensitive employees, and employees such as persons with disability, pregnant workers, or young persons. So this is where if an employee is working on a night shift, that's a sensitive risk group, for example, or somebody who's got disability, or someone who's pregnant, or someone who's under the age of 18, or someone who's under the age of 16. There are different categories. There are different requirements with regard to what's allowable, what's not allowable, what should be in place, etc. And again, that has to be addressed on the induction. Adapt training to changing circumstances or to new risks, and training should be repeated periodically. Training must be provided on recruitment. So again, that's your induction. In the event of transfer or change of task, again, there's a bit of a re-induction or retraining there. And when new work equipment, systems of work, or technology is introduced. Again, this is the focus, that induction isn't your one-stop shop for making people aware of training requirements, safety requirements, emergency requirements, etc. It is ongoing after induction. Where safety and health legislation requires specific health and safety training, such as the construction safe pass scheme. So, for example, if someone has to have safe pass as part of their induction to get onto site, then, as we said earlier, that cannot be charged for. And again, the employer has to assess risks and document risk assessments, and that's going to be then part of the policies and procedures that's going to be given to the individual at a later stage during induction. Provide a safety statement to include details of how safety is managed. Again, the safety statement, again, will be given to the person as part of the induction process, which we will be talking about. And finally, under the Act, and this is the overriding requirement of the Act, the organisation must demonstrate compliance with legislative requirements. So if you start somebody, then all the requirements that I have mentioned there need to be addressed. And not only that, you have to demonstrate that they're addressed. And how do you demonstrate they're addressed? You can demonstrate it by having documentation that is evidence of completing that process. And we're going to talk about that a bit later on. Health surveillance is in place where required. So health surveillance would be eye test, hearing test, different other tests that may be required as part of their job. Like some people working in a trusted environment may have to have respiratory checks done periodically. Someone working in a noise environment would have hearing tests done periodically. Someone using a computer for more than 1 hour per day, they can have eye tests done every couple of years. So that's your health surveillance, and whatever arrangements are in place should be part of the induction to inform the employee. Then the employee has to be also told in terms of the medical fitness to work. So people have to be medically fit to attend work, and if they have an issue, they need to inform their employer of an issue that may, if it manifests itself during work, pose a risk to themselves or to other workers. So again, this has to be duly, included as part of the induction process. So additional legislation that may make, and there's lots of it, I'm going to select a few. The Safety, Health and Welfare Work General Application Regulations. So this talks about what in place with regard to the workplace, with regard to work equipment, with regard to personal protective equipment, with regard to manual handling, workstation ergonomics, electricity, work at heights, noise, vibration, sensory groups. There's a whole raft of requirements there, depending on what work activity they're getting involved in. And again, the employer must ensure that they detail that and what the controls are. What safety signs are in place, what first aid is in place. The Fire Services Act requires individuals to be trained in fire awareness, and certain people tend to be trained in fire safety management, including fire wardens, etc. And employees must facilitate safe work environments with regard to fire and comply with the requirements. That's all detailed in the Fire Services Act, and it generally falls under your fire safety policy for a building. The Safety, Health and Welfare Work Reporting of Accidents and Dangerous Occurrence, again, one that tends to get missed, where individuals are told that they must report accidents, and report accidents on the day of the occurrence, not 2 days later or 3 days later or a week later, on the day of the occurrence, and a process in place in line with the requirements, statutory requirements, should it be reportable, i.e. over 3 days absence, few other requirements with regard to that. If somebody's working in construction, then there's additional requirements because of construction. I've mentioned safe pass. There's a lot more requirements. And again, how does that affect the induction, or what needs to be covered in the induction would have to be dealt with there. If companies are dealing with chemicals, again, there's more requirements with regard to chemicals. If people are dealing with transformers or some medical devices or some heavy-duty electrical devices where there may be electromagnetic fields, again, this is part of the induction process. So that's just a sample. I got biological agents there as well. COVID would be classed as a biological agent, so that's why I've put that in. In addition, there might be codes of practice. The most common code of practice applicable to everybody would be the code of practice for employers and employees on the prevention and resolution of bullying at work. And the latest version of that came out in 2021. So it's a very recent upgrade to that code of practice. And again, it's applicable to all organizations. And the organization should take account of the requirements of that when arranging for their induction. Again, the code of practice for biological agents, although we are covered primarily by the Safe Work Protocol, and if somebody's in construction, by the CIF procedure on working safely in construction sites. That's version 8 currently. So, you know, they are all applicable depending on what you are doing. So that's employees. But what must employees, that's employers, but what must employees then be told to do? And what must be clarified for them? Well, to comply with health and safety legislation, to take reasonable care of their own safety and that of anyone else affected by their activities, not to attend to work under the influence of drugs, alcohol, or both. If reasonably required, to submit to any appropriate, reasonable, and proportionate tests. That's a complicated one, and I advise you to discuss that with your health and safety consultant and your HR consultant both, because it is very complicated, that one. To cooperate with their employer and any other person, so, you know, with regard to safety, to make sure that they cooperate as opposed to inhibit or adversely affect safety compliance. Not to engage in improper conduct or other behaviours such as violence, bullying, or horseplay. To attend or undergo safety training and associate assessments. You can't what we call unreasonably refuse. To correctly use any article or substance and protective clothing and equipment provided, so that's very, very straightforward. To report hazardous activities and defects. Not to intentionally or recklessly interfere with, misuse or damage anything provided in the interests of safety. To be fit for work and report medical conditions that could adversely affect their or others' safety whilst at work. So again, they go to, I suppose, highlight the common things that employees need to be told. What are the rules about that within your organization, and what are the arrangements? Non-legislative requirements. Well, obviously we would need to know organizational arrangements. Who's responsible for what? Who they report to. The key company contacts for different things. Yeah. Information on work schedules, holidays, safety. Reporting of accidents, dangerous occurrence. Who should that go to? Reporting of good saves, things that could be improved or improvement ideas. What's the arrangements for that? What are the work arrangements? They'll also have to have workplace orientation, yeah, and orientation at their work location, including their emergency arrangements, what resources are there, what welfare arrangements are there, etc. So again, there's a lot in that one, and I'm summarising because obviously I don't want to keep people too long, and we have a bit to go through. Now, this is the one where sometimes it's probably one of the larger failings: policy statements, policies, and procedures. So policy statements are one-page documents. They tend to be on a particular topic. So ethical policy, quality policy, etc. It's a quality policy statement. And again, different companies have got different numbers of these, and go through those as part of the induction process, which is fine. Company policies. So example: safe driving policy, inoculation policy, work at height policy. And we've got here a privacy policy, just as an example. And these tend to be more involved documents which outline roles, responsibilities, etc., and are quite detailed. And then you have procedures. Now, procedures comes in various forms: safe systems of work, safe operating procedures, method statements, etc. And these kind of outline specific tasks or procedures or processes. So it's very important that they are provided to the employee and gone through with the employee. Obviously, the higher the risk, the greater of time should be spent on those. It's very important to note, don't be given employees policies or procedures that aren't applicable to them. I mean, if someone doesn't drive, hasn't a driving license, has no intention of getting a driving license, why do they have to sign off on the safe driving policy? And that kind of, it creates this, well, I'm just being bombarded with policies and procedures to sign off and read and sign and read and sign. So they aren't picked specifically for the tasks that the individual is going to be involved in. And it's very important that they are, because that, first of all, makes it very, very relevant, gets rid of all the stuff that they have no need of, so they can see value in what they're reading. Whereas if every second document or third document is of no relevance, you know what's going to happen. It's going to adversely affect their concentration, and yeah, they're not going to read it and not read it fully. And the likelihood is they won't take on board. And when it comes to an important document, important procedure, you might have lost them before they even get to it. So managing expectations. So I just put two of our guys in there just to add a bit of color to it. But yeah, we have to sit down with people and discuss what the expectations are. As an employer, what my expectations are of an employee. As an employee, what my expectations are of my employer. It's very simple, and we have to manage that. So work performance related. A training needs analysis. What training have they done? Is it relevant to what we need? And what training is required to address any gaps that may be there? So that helps establish a level of competence. Now, you may have to go a little bit further, because what you have on paper may not necessarily match ability in terms of when they go doing something, and you can have the opposite. Well, I've got no documentation or no training, but I've been doing it for years and I'm quite good at it. So you can have that as well. Identify gaps and put a plan in place to address these gaps. And it isn't, people always sometimes think, this should be formal training. It's not always formal training. Sometimes it's coaching. Sometimes it's putting one person with an experienced operator or individual. Yeah, yes, there is formal training involved, but you mix and blend the training to suit. I suppose this is the biggest area where there's opportunity to make a very, very good impression, have a good start, and carry on in a very positive manner, a proactive manner. We call it performance management. So you align performance management to achieving training milestones. Yes, so they're upskilling. Yeah, successfully completing competency assessments. And again, we would always say that if someone's been trained to work on a machine, and they have the training, and that's great. So we got evidence of training. The supervisor or another senior manager should assess their competency and do a check on them doing the work, and have sign off on that by both parties as a competency assessment. And of course, there might be corrective and improvement actions noted, which is very, very important. But at least then everybody knows where everybody stands with regard to competency. We're aligning performance management to meeting productivity requirements. So again, what is the expected productivity requirements over a period of time? Meeting quality and safety standards or requirements. So this is all performance management. We're looking at training milestones, competency milestones, productivity milestones, and quality and safety milestones, okay? And there may be other company requirements in there as well. And it could be relating to attendance, lots of different things. And we draw up an associate plan to include these milestones. Yeah. And when we're drawing up the plan, yeah, we suggest that you follow, people sometimes use the SMART acronym. We would go a little bit further and say the SMARTER acronym, which means that the plan is very specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant. And relevant means that we're doing it in a logical format You're not putting the cart before the horse in terms of training or competency assessments or anything like that. Yeah, it's time bound, so it's set. You've got time limits set on it. And there's a process of evaluating and reviewing, and finally, you're able to readjust it to suit, to speed the plan up, to slow the plan down, to adjust it to change the different circumstances that may apply. And this helps actually manage expectations from both parties, both the employee and the employer. So designing the induction, again, what we don't agree with is putting somebody at a desk and bombarding them with loads of documents and safety statement to read, and then sign a form at the end. I've read them all, and yes, great. I mean, yeah, it ticks a box. It doesn't do what it should do, really. Key components, we've talked about them. What are the HR legislative requirements? What are the safety, health, and well-being requirements? What are the general organizational requirements? What are the general work arrangements? The workplace orientation to ensure that's done. The work area orientation, so where the person is working, yeah? The policy statements, the required policies, the required procedures that are specific to their activity, that you have got them included in that. The training needs analysis, that's included in that, and the development of a performance management plan. And also a process for reviewing how it's all done. And finally, there's a sign-off process. So all of this has to become part of the induction process. And when you start thinking about it, you know, and all the information that should go in there, there's a fair bit of work. And also, the induction has to be adapted because, okay, we got somebody starting and they're in the office. Okay, we got somebody starting and they're in the warehouse. We got somebody starting and they're on the road. We got somebody starting and they're in manufacturing. You have to tailor it to suit. Now, there's a lot of things that are common, but then when it goes to the work activity, there's lots of things that are different, and they have to be, I suppose, you nearly modularize them like that. So how do we go about managing that? Well, the key way to do it is to assign responsibilities. Once you've designed what the induction should include, now you look at designing, well, who is responsible for that? So who's responsible? And I know it may sound ridiculous, but are they competent to do this? You know, in other words, if you say, well, okay, well, the supervisor is the best, you know, that's the person that should be given the policies and procedures for using that machinery, yeah. But in actual fact, it might be the departmental manager, because the supervisor, whilst they are very good from a technical and hands-on standpoint, their communication skills are poor enough, and they haven't got that much patience now, and they're also time under pressure. So we have to, I suppose, balance whoever's going to be doing it. Have they got the time and resources and competence to do it? So from a HR legislative requirements, if there's someone who's dedicated to HR, it should be them. Or sometimes it could be the senior person, the MD, or it could be the departmental manager. The safety, health and wellbeing requirements, again, if you've got a health and safety department, that's fine, or someone responsible for health and safety, that's fine. But the department manager and the supervisor. In fact, in some cases, it could be the health and safety person for an overview and general safety arrangements. It could be the department manager for specific safety requirements for that area. And it could be the supervisor for specific safety related to the machine the person's working on. You know, that's an example in a manufacturing environment. General organizational arrangements, again, HR or supervisor. General work arrangements, then you're down to the departmental manager for that work, or the supervisor over that work, or a combination of both. Workplace orientation, well, that can be the HR or the departmental manager. Usually it's a senior person to show that, we value this person coming in, and we're going to spend time taking them through and introduce them to various people. Work area orientation, again, because it's work area, I'll be looking at the departmental manager for that area or the supervisor. Policy statements. So the HR, which should deal with the policy statements associated with HR. The HS, Health and Safety Department, should deal with the health and safety policies. The departmental manager and supervisor should deal with the work-related. Now, I know some companies, that's the person wearing the one hat. you know, there's only 2 or 3 employees or 4 employees or 5 employees. And that's fine. That's fine. But you get the point is that we have to go through each of these. And if the company is larger or it's a larger organization, well, the HR person should deal with the HR issues, so the person who manages HR. Policy, required policies, same as that again, required procedures as before. Some will be HR procedures, some will be work-related procedures. The training needs analysis, which should be done by the departmental manager to try to evaluate the training that's needed for this individual and do the analysis of what training they have. And the performance management plan, again, that should be aligned to company objectives, aligned to their job role, and aligned to improving their skills and, I suppose, career development. And again, that can be done with HR, a departmental manager, and supervisor. And process review, you know, each process should be reviewed, and for example, the HR element should be reviewed by HR to make sure it's effective and appropriate. And where there are issues with regard to omissions, because it can happen, you know, you go design an induction and you miss something, that's fine. Well, then you add it to the induction and address it for that individual. And if it's very serious, address it for the recent new starters that may have been omitted for, and it's put in place. And then the process for sign-off, which I'm going to talk about separately because it is so important that there is sign-off to say that has been completed and both parties are aware of what's been done. So scheduling an induction, allow sufficient time, ensure selected inductors have availability, because sometimes they can be under time pressure. Prioritize important and high-risk activities so that they are addressed before the person's being exposed to risk. Set timeline for completion and allow for bumps in the road. So a bump in the road is where, well, okay, so the department supervisor is going to be available for you at 2 o'clock today to go through the induction, that section of the induction. And then suddenly, there's an urgent issue with a client. I'm afraid they're not available. So let's see, we'll sort something else for you. Give me a few minutes. You know, so you have to allow for that. That's going to happen in a normal work environment. Publish induction schedule to include, so the inductee is given the schedule and the inductees are given, the inductors are given the schedule, include dates, activities, inductor details. So it's very transparent. So getting sign-off and validation, this is the last little section. So sign-off sheets should be placed for each section, each inductor, each policy, each procedure and performance management plan. The whole idea here is that we get sign-off so that we know that the HR has been addressed, we know that the safety requirements, we know that work-related items have been addressed, and we have sign-off. And its sign-off tends to be for the inductee, I have been taken through the procedure above and I will comply with its requirements. Should I be unsure, I will stop and seek advice or guidance from my supervisor, or in their absence, a member of the management team, signed, date, etc. And then inducted by the person who just inducted on that section would sign that. So that's your proof that it has been done. That's proof that they are aware of it. That's proof that they are signed to say that they will comply. Not that we ever want to use it into the future, but let's take, for example, our accident procedure. This is what happens, and you're supposed to report an accident on the day of occurrence, and we've gone through it, and you've signed it off, etc. And then 2 years down the line, you have an accident, and you report it 3 days later. Well, I'm sorry, but we don't know. That could have happened at home. That could have happened anywhere bar here. You know the rules here. Oh, I'm not aware of the rules. No, I don't. Well, actually, I've got your signature here on that, and that's what it says there. You know, that is a huge weight in terms of value. But I will talk about adding value to that a little bit more in terms of re-induction. Okay, so this is very, very important that that's in place and we have sign off. And really, what is validation? Well, validation is that the inductors will validate that everything is in place. You know, it's verifying that all sections applicable to me if I'm doing part of the induction for an individual. And then someone would coordinate all of those, Yeah, and it's generally the HR or department manager would collate all of these sign-off sheets and do a review of that, and then sign it off for the MD or senior person to review and say it's complete. So you're closing the loop then in terms of the induction process. Okay, which is very important, and it should be fairly comprehensive. So ongoing performance review and re-induction, and this is where we add value, or you have the opportunity to add value to both the employee, but also the employee's contribution to the business. So performance management review, it's very important that the employee's performance is reviewed in accordance with the performance management plan that has been agreed at induction. Again, we're managing expectations by doing that. As required, make the necessary corrective actions. So corrective is where something has been identified as not meeting the required standard. How are we going to try to put that right? Yeah. And then improvement. Well, how can we improve on where we are? You know, you're doing very well. How can we improve on where we are? And add that into the management plan. And you manage that continually throughout the process and set, timelines. So every 2 months, 3 months, etc. Be very mindful that by the time you get to the end of a probationary period, or well in advance of that, you should have your mind made up as to whether this person has the ability and capabilities to do the work that you want, or whether they're going to cause issue for the organization in terms of resources, etc. And again, you have the opportunity to, at that stage, to address that. If it goes past the probationary period and it goes to permanent contract, well, then that changes the rules completely, and you're into a different scenario. And if you have problems after that, well, then you have to take responsibility because the company didn't do what they should have done for both parties' sake. A re-induction, we do suggest that re-induction is done. It is extremely worthwhile, and it should occur every 2 to 3 years. And I'm not saying go through the whole process again. You don't have to do that, but you'll be taking the key aspects out of it. You focus on the HR legislative requirements, you focus on the health and safety and well-being legislative requirements, and you focus on the workplace requirements, and also the performance management plan. So you're continually focusing on that. Okay, so that's it in terms of the lecture on this. I will take a Q&A now, and I have some text questions there. So I'm going to first of all take it off recording.